Hello and welcome to the Scatterable channel, and today let's go over my favorite CPU and GPU combos for 2026. I have built hundreds of gaming PCs on this channel, all with their own CPUs and GPUs, and in this video, I'm going to detail you my best of for combos, not just for gamers, but also for VR, sim racing, artificial intelligence, video editing, photo editing, 3D modeling, anything you can think of, I have a combo for that. And I'm trying to make this even easier because the best of these combos will be on my website, pcbuilds.gg, in pre-configured PC builds already for you if you want to check those out while you're watching this video, which all of that, including these combos and parts, can be found in the description down below. With all that said, let's get into it. Here are all the various timestamps for different combos I'm going to be going over in this video, but I'm going to start with the non-gaming combos first. First, I'm going to start with my content creation CPU and GPU combos because those are going to be very Intel heavy, whereas as you'll see for the rest of this video, everything is pretty much AMD Ryzen for a reason. But for Intel, they're actually quite good for video editing, photo editing, 3D modeling, so on and so forth, because across the board, Intel CPUs actually outperform Ryzen when it comes to multi-threaded applications that require lots of cores and threads. Anyways, here are the combos. We're going to start with the budget video and photo editing combo. For the choice of CPU, you can go with an Intel Core i3-14100F if you want. I think that's pretty fine for basic video editing and photo editing. But if you're going to be working with some complex timelines with lots of layers, perhaps you might want to get a CPU with more cores and threads. And that's where like an Intel Core i5-14400F would make a bit more sense. You are welcome to stick to the stock cooler. You can get aftermarket one if you want. For the motherboard, once again, the beauty of this LGA 1700 Intel socket is that it can utilize DDR4 memory instead of DDR5. So go ahead and pick up a DDR4 B760M motherboard, which once again, you can find that in the description down below in the pcbuilds.gg link for this build, which we'll get to in a bit. Then for the RAM, I mean, yeah, you can get away with 16 gigabytes of DDR4 memory, but if you're planning to do lots of video editing, you kind of want 32, which by the way, 32 gigabytes of DDR4 memory is still significantly cheaper than 32 gigabytes of DDR5 memory. Then for your power supply, anything basic, like a 650 watt 80 plus bronze up to a 750 watt 80 plus gold power supply is fine. It entirely depends on your choice of GPU, which will be any Intel Arc graphics card. So Intel Arc GPUs are not only very affordable, they are the best budget GPUs for video editing. That's because they can process many different types of footage, especially that really complex 4K 10-bit 422 color footage in a compressed HEVC or H.265 format directly onto your timeline, be able to scrub through it, edit it without any lag. And it was actually one of the first GPUs on the market to be able to do that before NVIDIA eventually got their stuff together and were able to implement that into their RTX 5000 GPUs. Anyways, that is a very complex video editing codec that I don't expect a lot of you who are watching this video are going to be using. Regardless, Intel Arc GPUs are still quite recommended. I recommend them more so over NVIDIA because unlike NVIDIA, Intel are very plentiful when it comes to the amount of VRAM they offer in their budget GPUs. You can find GPUs like the RTX 4060 and 5060, which are fine. They are going to be pricier than all these Intel Arc options other than the B580, but they only come with 8 gigabytes of VRAM, whereas those Intel Arc GPUs come with 10, 16, or 12, or in the case of the A580 and A570, they come with 8, but they are very inexpensive. And they have a 256-bit memory bus. Suffice to say, for video editing on a budget, Intel Arc is the way to go. And the PC build that is the equivalent to this on pcbuilds.gg is my $1,000 multimedia and productivity PC build. There you can find a template that follows exactly this with all of the parts you want to do if you actually wanted to build a PC based off this CPU and GPU combo. And yes, this build can still do gaming. Any of these can do gaming, yeah. But if you wanted a bit more horsepower, here is the all-around editing and 3D modeling. 3D modeling is something I see a lot of you guys are looking at doing in your builds, not just for Blender, but even for game development. And for that, more or less everything is about the same, but the choice of GPU expands. Once again, for CPU options, it's pretty straightforward. I would at least start up with the i5-14400F, because if you plan to do any game development, you're going to need something with at least 6 cores, and the i5s definitely serve that. There's also the i5-14600K and i7-14700K if you wanted to amp up your CPU option. But once again, the beauty of the LGA 1700 socket is that we can use DDR4 motherboards instead of DDR5, so you can still get 32 gigabytes or even 64 of DDR4 memory. And then for the power supply, it's the exact same. I don't expect you to go with anything crazy. The next combo we're going to cover is the crazy 3D modeling and creativity build. But otherwise, for GPU options, you have a lot. Some are going to be great for just video editing, and some are going to be great for video editing and some 3D work. So starting off, I definitely would at least stick it with an Arc B570 for video editing. That's a really excellent battle mage GPU that utilizes the second generation of Intel decoders. Yeah, Intel Media decoders and encoders. Really nice for AV1 and that complex H.265 422 10-bit footage I was just talking about earlier. And then we have a used RTX 4060, which if I could change it, I would just limit it to 3D modeling. If you were looking to use it for video editing, I would get an Intel Arc GPU over that for the same price, but it is one of the more affordable NVIDIA GPUs that is fine for 3D modeling. Although you would ideally want one with more VRAM, but at this price range, you can't be too picky with what's out there. Then for video editing, Arc B580, again, really awesome GPU choice for purely video editing, 12 gigabytes of VRAM, $300. You really can't beat that for that purpose, especially from AMD and NVIDIA. But otherwise, the RTX 5060 is a pretty good video editing and 3D modeling GPU. On the video editing side, because it's an RTX 5000 GPU, it does have dedicated 422 color media engines built in with the Blackwell architecture. So that's really great for video editing, which is something you wouldn't have seen in RTX 4000. So that's fine. Also, the RTX 5060 Ti is fine as well. Just note, again, 8 gigabytes of VRAM for $430. Sure, you can do 3D modeling, but you're spending a lot of money on a GPU that only has 8 gigabytes of VRAM. But for video editing, it's pretty great. But if you wanted to spend the absolute most, an RTX 5070 is going to be the best of a worst case situation right now with how expensive VRAM is, because it'll do great for video editing because of the latest Blackwell architecture with those updated media engines, and 3D modeling because it at least has 12 gigabytes of VRAM, which is worlds better than 8 gigabytes. Ideally, it'd be 16. But this is what we're working with right now. And this is closest to my $1,300 or $1,500 multimedia PC build found on PCBuild.gg. There's a complete build list with this combo, completely written out in its own part list in various regions. Feel free to check it out. And now for the super duper crazy content creator CPU and GPU combo. So not just video editing and 3D modeling and photo editing, but also some very niche stuff like 3D simulations, previs work for scenes, denoising if you're into that, and for maybe older footage or in the footage you shoot, AI upscaling. Anyways, for anything under the sun, content creation, video production, 3D modeling, this is what I do. For the choice of CPU, I would still stick it to Intel. These will still outperform Ryzen when it comes to multi-threaded applications. So anything that deal with content creation or productivity or multimedia, I'd still stick it to Intel. Plus, these not only beat Ryzen, but they also do it while running a lot cooler. And if you're going to be editing in a small little den that's going to get hot, you might as well go with the CPU choice that's going to run cooler out of the box than having to tune a Ryzen CPU, which is to say you can tune this to run even cooler if you wanted to. Regardless, the 250K Plus and 270K Plus are fan-freaking-tastic CPUs. Even for gaming, they beat Ryzen in FPS per dollar in some cases. It just is on an ending socket. That's the only downside. But otherwise, really awesome CPU choices. Pair it up with a beefier cooler. So if you want to go with a water cooler, you're welcome to. I personally like a really nice aftermarket cooler that's maybe $50 to $60. That way you don't have to worry about liquid or moving parts. It's just an aluminum heat block, and that's going to dissipate all your heat. Then for the motherboard, get a Z890 motherboard. Those have lots of M.2 slots on them. If you want to throw in as many M.2 SSDs into your editing or multimedia PC for whatever you're going to be storing on it, you could probably even do a special RAID configuration on that motherboard, I believe. You want to do Z890 over B860. Then for the power supply options, again, it entirely depends on the GPU. Unless you're going for a 5090, I don't see you needing more than 850 watts. But otherwise, for the GPU choices, you are only going to want to consider NVIDIA in this price range because Intel Arc doesn't have anything that competes with any of this, and AMD are great for casual video editing, but not this crazy level of stuff, and they're not also great for 3D modeling. So RTX 5060 Ti 16GB, great video editing and 3D modeling GPU with 16GB of VRAM, but I think the RTX 5070 12GB is a bit better. Then you have the RTX 5070 Ti 16GB, a really fantastic GPU. It's just very overpriced at the moment. That is my only issue with it. And then the absolute best GPU, because you don't need a 5090 for this, is going to be the RTX 5080. I think if you actually look into it, it has two dedicated encoders. Okay. Hold up. I actually don't recall this off the top of my head, but it has the same amount of encoders and decoders as the 5090 while retailing for a lot less. Whereas the 5070 Ti only has one of those media coders instead of two. Anyways, there's a screenshot. It details everything. And this is closest to my $2,000 multimedia PC build found on PCbuilds.gg. That is peak video editing, 3D modeling, whatever the heck you want to do. It is there if you want to check it out. Otherwise, let's move on to the next category. So I am obligated to do this because it's definitely a thing. And it's a CPU and GPU combos video. It can't all just be gaming. This is my artificial intelligence and local LLM PC build CPU and GPU combo. If you wanted to build a PC for that kind of stuff, this is what I do. For the CPU choice, I actually start out with some higher end Ryzen 9 CPUs like the 9900X or 9950X. Because depending on your AI workloads, there could be lots of scripting going on for your local LLM, and that just requires lots of threads. So a CPU with maybe 24 or 32 threads, and those Ryzen CPUs are the best at that. And I think their motherboards are also preferred for AI work versus Intel, which is why we're going with Ryzen for this combo. Then, get whatever aftermarket cooler you want. I think most AI work is going to be morely intensive on the GPU and SSD and RAM than the CPU, so get whatever works. But for the motherboard, you want to spend on a nice X870E motherboard that has plenty of PCIe lanes, plenty of M.2 slots, so you can fit in multiple graphics cards onto a single motherboard for utilizing a bunch of AI tensor cores if you're working with NVIDIA GPUs, so on and so forth. And with that, you're going to need a system that has not only a lot of memory, so starting from 64 gigabytes of RAM all the way up to 256, which is just ridiculous. But if you can afford that, all the more power. But speaking of power, I think at minimum, you're going to at least want an 850 watt 80 plus gold, because that is enough just for a single GPU that isn't a 5090. But if you plan to do anything crazy with multiple GPUs, like I alluded to earlier, I think the most you're going to want to consider is going to be a 1600 watt power supply with dual 12-volt power cable headers featured on the power supply unit for at least two GPUs that you can throw onto the motherboard. Anyways, that's the most insane power supply option. But speaking of insanity, we have tons of GPU options for AI, and really the name of the game is VRAM. That's basically it. You want a GPU with as much video memory as possible to load up whatever models of your choice. And I will say, although NVIDIA is the go-to, since then there's been a lot of support added to Intel Arc and Radeon graphics cards. For Intel Arc, you have OpenVINO, and for AMD, there is ROCm, which from what I'm hearing is actually increasing in support for many AI models on different LLM softwares. So that is good to see. But otherwise, I have all the GPU options listed right there. Some of them are new. Quite a few of them are used, because finding a new graphics card nowadays with a lot of VRAM that is not ridiculously expensive is quite the challenge. I think my favorites in here are going to have to be a RTX 3060 12GB Intel Arc A770 with 16GB, a 7600 XT with 16GB if you're able to find the right software and model that can work with ROCm could be a really good deal. Otherwise, the 4060 Ti 16GB and 5060 Ti 16GB are bread and butter. They have 16GB of VRAM and they're not crazy expensive. So those will be your best bang for buck options, I think, for AI. And it just goes up in insanity from there. But I do have a PC build dedicated for this category here, found in pcbuilds.gg, if you wanted to build a dedicated AI workstation local LLM PC build. Woo! And now we've made it to gaming. Hooray! Finally, fun stuff to talk about, which I'll quickly preface by saying you really shouldn't have to worry about bottlenecking. And really, when it comes to CPU and GPU combos, it's not like Skyrim potions. It's not like you gotta find the exact right ingredients in order to yield the best effect for your potion. CPUs and GPUs don't interact like that. There's no special sauce with a certain CPU or GPU. It really just comes down to your budget, what you can afford, and not pairing up a very underpowered old CPU with a very high-end modern GPU. As long as you don't do that, you are fine. So if you were gonna ask if X CPU works with X GPU in the comments section, I promise you 99% of the time, it's gonna be fine and you aren't gonna run into a bottleneck. With that disclaimer out of the way, let's start with the best budget CPU and GPU combos. These are just for 1080p gaming. And actually this first one we're about to cover is a PC build video I just did on the channel. If you wanna check it out, it's an $800 PC build featuring this CPU, which let's start off with first. The Intel Core i3-14100F, despite being a 4-core 8-threaded CPU, will beat out other similar Ryzen CPUs with 6 cores and 12 threads. Why is that? Well, that is because the 14100F has better single-threaded performance. And still, many games today are going to be relying more on single-threaded performance than multi-core performance. And the 14100F just is faster than like a Ryzen 5 5500, a Ryzen 5 4500, 3600 in this price range, whatever, so on and so forth. So if you wanted to get the most performance in this budget category, you're actually gonna wanna go with Intel. And even then, your max CPU upgrade of choice, you've got some options here, could either be an Intel Core i5 14600KF or Intel Core i7 14700KF later down the road, if you wanted to really upgrade from this i3. So you have some solid CPU options to look forward to if you feel like your i3 isn't serving you the beans with a higher end GPU in the future. So that's great and all. You can use the stock cooler that comes with this CPU. Yes, there is one in here and it does come with thermal paste. Once again, the beauty of going with LGA 1700 is that we can utilize DDR4 memory instead of DDR5. So we can go with a B760M DDR4 motherboard and save us a lot of money when it comes to memory, which means we can go at 16 gigabytes of DDR4 memory. And right now, as you can see on screen, that is significantly less expensive than a 16 gigabyte kit of DDR5 memory. So you're saving a lot of money in doing this. Again, the downside is that there aren't that much upgrade options because this is technically a dead socket, but I think upgrading from an i3 to an i7 should be really good for at least 5 to 6 years. Anyways, for power supply options, 550 watts to 650 watts, 80 plus bronze, fine. That's what I did for the PC build that I eventually used for this combo. But for graphics card options, I gave you quite a bit. So here's what you can work with. For the minimum GPU choice, so this is the minimum I would consider, although really you can go with anything. If your friend has like a free GPU that's 5 years old and he's gonna give it to you for free, that is the best value you consider. Don't be like, oh my God, it's not gonna work because it's not the right one for my comp. No, come on, like I said, we're not making special potions here. We're not being wizards. We are just putting together a CPU and GPU combo and calling it a day. There's no special sauce. Anyways, for my minimum GPU options, if you wanted to get some good picks that I like, getting some used RTX 2070 Supers or 2080s are really good right now. They're running for about 170 to 180 bucks, come with 8 gigabytes of VRAM, and they are great for 1080p gaming and also 1080p ray tracing. Oddly enough, for whatever reason, since there's so many more NVIDIA GPUs out on the market, they are cheaper than their AMD counterparts. And the nice thing with RTX 2000 that I think is actually making them age somewhat better than GTX 1000 is that these have first generation ray tracing cores, which will do better than RX 6000. So all things considered, RTX 2000 GPUs, if you were to pick one up used, is not a bad choice in 2026. So 2070 Super and 2080, pretty solid options. But for brand new options, the Intel Arc A580 or A570 is going to be really hard to beat. Same goes for the Intel Arc B570. NVIDIA does not have a GPU. Well, they do, but it's $300, the 5050. And then AMD don't have anything in this price range. And supposedly they are bringing a cheap GPU to the market, that being the RX 9050, but it has 4 gigabytes of VRAM. And the B570 has 10. Yeah, so those are your minimum GPU options. But for maximum, I wouldn't look above getting anything beyond these, because you could potentially run into bottlenecks, although it wouldn't be that bad. But some of my favorite options are going to have to be a used RX 6800, a used RX 7700 XT, a brand new RTX 5060 Ti 8GB only for 1080p, don't get it for 1440p, or at the absolute top, a RX 9060 XT 16GB. Which is to say, if that was a bunch of stuff that I spewed off and you don't really know what to gather from that, I have a dedicated $800 gaming PC build linked in the description down below through my website pcbuilds.gg that actually is, yeah, it's just been updated. If you wanted to build a budget PC based off this budget 1080p CPU and GPU combo, it is all there for you if you want to check it out. But if we keep going, to answer some more questions, yes, this combo can stream. It absolutely can. Whether you go with an NVIDIA, AMD, or Intel graphics card, it will be able to stream and record your games to Twitch, YouTube, or wherever. They can also do video editing. That is fine. These can't do sim racing. They're not fast enough. You're gonna have to spend more money. Can they do VR? Not with the minimum GPU options, but with the max GPU options, those more expensive $300 to $400 ones that I covered earlier, those will do VR. Otherwise, I really like this. That's why I made a PC build around it. But if you wanted something even cheaper, I have my 1080p minus gaming PC. This for $100 less is fine. It's gonna be slightly slower. It actually, in terms of FPS per dollar, it might be the same as the $800 build. But for the choice of CPU, you're gonna wanna start off with a Ryzen 5 5500. That is a very inexpensive CPU, but the reason why it's so inexpensive is that it's limited to PCI Gen 3.0, which really limits your GPU options if you wanted to get full performance out of them, especially if they're an older budget GPU. Otherwise, stick it to the stock cooler that comes with the 5500F, a budget B550M motherboard that uses DDR4 memory. All good, because as you can see, you can use the same 16GB DDR4 RAM kit, same one as the Intel, same power supply, but for the GPU options, it's a little different. You can't go with Intel Arc with that Ryzen CPU because the 5500 only supports PCI Gen 3.0, and those Intel GPUs run way better with a CPU that supports PCI Gen 4.0, like the 14100F. Which is to say, for our GPU options, you're actually going to want to consider NVIDIA. Because back in 2018, when NVIDIA weren't encumbered with AI and its profits and actually give a crap about their budget GPU offerings, they offered all of their RTX 2000 GPUs back in 2018 with a full PCI Express X16 slot. Whereas nowadays, you'll find even the latest RTX 5060 only comes with a PCI Express X8 slot. What the heck, NVIDIA? You're giving us less for more 8 years later. Which is to say, those RTX 2000 GPUs you see right there for used all come with a PCI Express X16 slot, which will be completely fine with a slightly slower CPU like the 5500 that only has PCI Gen 3.0 supported. Anyways, with that, for the max GPU options, it's pretty much the exact same as the last CPU and GPU combo that I just covered. And if I hadn't mentioned it, you can upgrade that 5500 to a 5800 X3D if you wanted to, or a 5500 X3D, 5600 X3D, 5700 X3D, doesn't matter. This is still a really great CPU to upgrade to, the 5800 X3D. It's aged really well. Anyways, this is closest to my $700 PC build found on pcbuilds.gg. I would follow that if you wanted to build a PC around this combo. And can this do streaming? Yup, it definitely can. Can it do sim racing? You're gonna need something that's a bit more expensive, a bit faster. Can it do editing? Yes, just for basic gaming videos and basic videos. For actual intensive color grading with 4K H.265 compressed footage, You may want something with an Intel Arc GPU like we covered in the last combo. But if it's just, gaming videos for your YouTube channel or for your friends, this will be fine because those NVIDIA GPUs especially they were the gold standard back in 2018, and they'll still be fine for gaming videos. And then for VR, with those minimum GPU options, I would actually take that back. I think they technically can do it because VR games haven't progressed a whole lot in the last 6 years. And for the max GPU options, of course, all of those can run VR pretty easily. Okay, and now for the best mainstream CPU and GPU combos. This is where I expect a lot of you are going to be basing your builds around because you want something that is obviously faster than a budget gaming PC, but isn't completely destroying your wallet and making you go broke. And to be honest, this is where I would build a PC right now in 2026 because of how expensive memory is at the moment and of how expensive VRAM is for certain GPUs. Before we get into the next section, if you've been enjoying this video up until this point, feel free to give it a like. It's completely free, you don't have to pay for it, and it does really help me out in the YouTube algorithm for helping these videos on the Scattervolt channel. So with that, let's get back to the video. So to start things off, I have my 1080p Plus gaming PC. This can also do 1440p because the PC build this combo is based off of successfully ran 1440p. But I'm calling it 1080p Plus just for namesake. Or maybe I'll rename it to 1440p minus, whatever. For the CPU options, the Ryzen 5 7500F is really hard to beat. I know I have the 7600X and 9600X listed right below it, but honestly, man, you won't tell the difference in person. Save yourself that $30. Get the 7500F, which you can actually use to get a aftermarket air cooler because that 7500F doesn't come with one, nor does the 7600X or 9600X. Oh, let's get into this. Why AMD? Why am I only going with AMD for these mainstream CPU and GPU combos that are only going to be using DDR5 memory? Well, that is because, unfortunately, with Intel, with their latest LGA 1851 socket, this is it. I'm holding the last CPU, or one of two, that'll be made for LGA 1851, that being the 270K Plus and 250K Plus. And one thing I always like for my PC builds to have is future upgradability. And one thing AMD has been so good on since AM4, since 2017, is supporting multiple CPU generations on a single socket. And heck, this one I'm holding right here is still working on the AM4 socket that debuted almost 10 years ago, the 5800X3D. AMD brought this back just because they could. And yeah, seriously, come on. AMD are really good when it comes to CPU socket support, which is to say, for their latest Ryzen 7000 and 9000 CPUs on the AM5 socket, I expect these to be able to be upgraded to the Ryzen 10,000 CPUs or even 11,000 CPUs if those are a thing, because I think AMD stated they're going to be supporting that socket until 2027 or 2028, or it could be longer. Who knows? Which is to say, if you wanted to upgrade from that 7500F, you have some good options even right now. You have the 9850X3D or the 9800X3D or the future 10800X3D or 11800X3D. This is why I wanted to go with AMD, is because you have plenty of CPU upgrade options to look forward to if you start out with something that's inexpensive in budget versus Intel right now. Because if you went with the LGA 1851 socket, this is it. This is your only upgrade option. And if you wanted anything faster than this, you're gonna have to buy a whole new motherboard and potentially even a whole new RAM kit and another CPU, obviously. So it's just a hassle. I like AMD for that reason, and that's why we're only going to stick it to Ryzen going forward in these combos. And I think a lot of you will get that as well. And I think Intel are actually taking that advice, and they're making their next CPU socket on 1954 being able to support at least 4 generations of CPU, which is something much better to see from Intel. Anyways, with all that covered, feel free to get an aftermarket air cooler with the $30 you save going with the 7500F over the 7600 or 7600X. 16 gigabytes of DDR5 memory is what you're gonna need to put on that B850 motherboard. 32 is very pricey right now, but 16 is still fine for gaming in 2026. For the power supply options, 650 watt to 750 watt is gonna be fine for our GPU options, which is to say you can use any graphics card. You don't need a special one. There's not going to be any extra special sauce you're going to get pairing a specific GPU with that Ryzen 5 7500F. I wouldn't stress out about it, but here are my favorites. From Intel, the Intel Arc A580 and A750, brand new. You can't find anything else like them. Brand new. AMD and Nvidia don't have a good $200 graphics card to sell. Nvidia does actually have the RTX 3050 6GB, but that is a laughably slow GPU and you should not consider it. It's not even worth it. But for used, the RTX 3060 Ti 8GB is a really good shout. Actually, as you'll see, it is cheaper than a RTX 3060 on the used market because it has 8GB of VRAM. And if you're just going to be playing at 1080p, like what this combo suggests, 8GB of VRAM is going to be fine, and it actually provides you a little bit more comfort because Nvidia seriously was a bit more like sparing to gamers back then than they are now. The 3060 Ti 8GB and the 3070 have 256-bit memory buses to pair with that VRAM. So although it may have 8, it does have a bit of a larger memory bus, which does help out. Otherwise, I think the best of these is going to have to be an Intel Arc B570 brand new if you didn't want to get a used NVIDIA GPU with 10GB of VRAM. There's also the Intel Arc B580. That's actually the GPU that I ended up going with this combo for the PC build that is attached with this. It ran 1440p pretty nicely, so that's why it's not in here, but you can consider it in here if you wanted to. But then for the max graphics card options that won't bottleneck, an RTX 5070 and RX 9070 16GB are going to be your max options. Anything beyond that, and I get a slightly faster CPU just to be a little comfortable. But anyways, this is all based off of my $1,000 gaming PC build found on PCBuild.gg. That is a complete build list that is based off this combo. I had a pretty good time gaming at 1440p on it, which means it can certainly do 1080p, and it's a nice build that isn't ridiculously expensive. And it's actually only like $100 more than the PS5 Pro and $50 less than the Steam Machine. And it's probably faster than the Steam Machine, actually. Anyways, expect this combo to be able to do ray tracing. It can do that with the Intel Arc, the AMD, and the NVIDIA GPUs. You could do sim racing, but I'm saving that for the next combo just to be safe so you can have a bit more horsepower. Streaming, yes, you can stream any game you want to Twitch, to YouTube, and any codec variation you want, whether it's H.264 or AV1, you can do that. This can also do video editing, whether it's basic gaming videos or some stuff that's a bit more professional. And VR, this can do VR unless you go with an Intel Arc GPU. If you go with an Intel Arc B570, A580, A750, or B580, those can't do VR because their drivers for it are pretty poor, which is only like gonna upset 1% of you watching this video. Anyways, now let's move on to our first 1440p CPU and GPUs combo. Once again, I think it's the exact same as far as the CPU, as far as the cooler, as far as the motherboard, the RAM. The power supply options though, I have beefed them up a little bit because if we want to run 1440p comfortably, we're going to need some faster GPUs, which will require a bit more power. So for the minimum GPU options, which is to say you can go with anything you want. If your friend's going to give you a free graphics card, that is the best value you can get out of this entire video. But if you wanted to get something, I'm a fan of a used RTX 2080 Ti. It has enough VRAM at 11, and it can do ray tracing, and it's only $250, which is surprisingly cheap. There's also a brand new Intel Arc B580. I already tested that GPU in my $1,000 gaming PC build guide. It hit it out of the park. It even ran Fortnite well. Like, you know, that's kind of like the ultimate litmus test for a gaming PC, but if it can run Fortnite well without any micro stutters, then it's a good graphics card. And AMD and NVIDIA don't have anything close to that when it comes to VRAM and value per dollar versus the B580. But for other used options, RX 6800 16GB is really good. The RTX 3080 with 10GB is still good. Yes, it may have 10GB, but its memory bus is really wide, so it kind of makes up for it. Or if you wanted to get the last new option, which I'm not the hugest fan of, there is the RX 9060 XT 16GB. It's currently overpriced, but it does have 16GB of VRAM, and it is a better value than that 5060 Ti 16GB for sure for 1440p gaming. Then for max GPU options, actually, technically you could go with the same ones as the last one. I don't know why I went with the 9070 XT. I think that'd be okay with the 7500F. Same goes for the 5070 Ti. But otherwise, this is all based off my $1,200 gaming PC build found on pcbuilds.gg if you wanted to build a PC around this combo, completely laid out for you. Can this do ray tracing? Yes. Can this do sim racing? Yes, but on a single screen, not a triple ultra wide or anything like that. Can this do streaming? Absolutely. My $1,000 build already did that. And this is $1,200. It's going to have an even easier time doing that. Editing, of course, if a PC can stream games, it can definitely edit. Can it do VR? Yes, except for the Intel Arc B580. Every other GPU can do it, just not that one. If you are still watching this CPU and GPU combos and you've put up with me, I think you like the way I talk and what I cover as far as tech goes. And if that's the case, I really recommend you subscribe to the Scattervolt channel. I will be posting more videos going into the holiday season until December to make sure you guys get the best possible PC components and PC builds before memory prices and AI completely take over the personal computing space. So if you want to be a part of this journey and the last few things on Noah's Ark before AI takes over, feel free to subscribe to the Scattervolt channel. Now we move on to our mid-range, but I think we should classify it to basically high end because of how much memory prices and VRAM has gone up. But otherwise, these are all 1440p. They're all really good. There is a 1080p plus esports combo if you're that person who has a 1080p high refresh rate monitor, like 360 hertz and above. If you don't care about graphics and you just want ultimate frame rate for games like Valorant, CS2, Fortnite, Overwatch 2, that kind of stuff. So to start off with the 1440p plus CPU and GPU combo, you can go with a bunch of CPUs because at 1440p, you are less CPU bound and more GPU bound. So you could even go with a Ryzen 5 7500F if you wanted to. But if you wanted something faster, so you can support a faster GPU, a 7700X for $220 is really hard to beat, like really hard. And that's 8 cores, 16 threads. It's not an X3D CPU, but it retails for at least $100 or more less. Sorry if that sounded confusing, than a 7800 X3D right now. That is a really good option. But if you wanted an X3D, feel free to go for it. If you wanted to throw in the 7800 X3D or 7700 X3D into this combo, I'm not stopping you. It's going to work just the same as the 7500F that costs 120 bucks. That's the beauty of PC building. You can throw in whatever CPU you want, and as long as it's not the top tier CPU, it's going to work in whatever motherboard you put it in. So again, aftermarket cooler, a B850 motherboard, that's fine. We don't need X870. For RAM, I really think 16 gigabytes of DDR5 memory is still very much doable, but if you wanted 32 and you have the budget for it, then go for it. It's just, gonna be pricey. Then for the power supply options, anything from 650 watts to 750 watts is going to be supportive for any of our GPU options, which we'll cover now. For the minimum GPU options, if you want to do 1440p comfortably, hence the name 1440p plus, RX 9070 GRE is your first option you should consider. That is locked in right now at $550. It has not gone up in price. It's probably going to be the one GPU that isn't going to go up in price in the relative future, unlike the RTX 5070 and RX 9070, which have already seen $50 price increases in the last 30 days. And that RX 9070 GRE is going to be locked in at $550. That can certainly do 1440p gaming. It's just a cut down version of the RX 9070. But all of those GPU options are pretty good. If you can find a discounted RX 9070 16GB, that would be the absolute best GPU option. But if you can't do that, the RX 9070 GRE will be your next best bet, because I think the price premium for a RX 9070 over that other GPU will not be worth it if it exceeds $100. But then for your max GPU options, which I would consider if you went with a higher end CPU, like what I covered earlier, RX 9070 XT is the best. It's still by and large, it's just such a, I can't believe, I'm just speechless about it, because there's other comparable GPUs to it, like the RTX 5070 Ti 16GB that retail for almost $300 more and is a 4-figure GPU. This is still 3 figures. It's still under $1,000 and it still kicks butt. and has 16 gigabytes of VRAM. AMD are not going to make a graphics card like that ever again because they messed up. They made it too fast. But there's also the RTX 5080. If you wanted the second fastest GPU on the market, it's just going to cost you a very pretty penny. That is going to be, what is it? $700, no, $600 more than an RX 9070 XT. I don't think it's $600 faster. You're not getting a almost 2 times faster GPU. You're getting a 1.2 at most faster GPU, but it is there if you wanted to use that. But anyways, this is all based off of my $1,500 PC build template found on pcbuilds.gg. There is a complete build that utilizes this CPU and GPU combo, and you should have a no questions asked 1440p gaming experience. I recall playing on a PC that it was very similar to this last year, and I was just telling everyone, this is where you should stop. Like, you don't need to build anything faster than this. And I think 1500 is like your realistic maximum, because anything beyond this is just diminishing returns. And to answer everything, yes, I can do ray tracing. Yes, I can do sim racing. Yes, I can do streaming. Yes, I can do editing. Yes, I can do VR. It is a $1,500 freaking PC. It should be able to do everything you ask of it. I don't want to see any questions about it. This can do everything. But if you want to do everything while spending more money, here's another combo. Here's my 1440p++ gaming PC. Same CPU options, same cooler, same motherboard, same RAM, well, actually, power supply options we have amped up just a little bit because I think, some of our GPU options could ask of 850 watts at peak load. So for the minimum GPU option, RX 9070 XT, again, the best GPU of this generation from all the major brands, from AMD, NVIDIA, and Intel. The pricing is unmatched. The performance is unmatched for its price. 16 gigabytes in that card for that price, very much doable. It's really good because beyond that, you're spending $1,000 on an RTX 5070 Ti that doesn't offer that much uplift in rasterization and not enough in ray tracing to justify its $300 price increase. Beyond that though, if you wanted to go with an RTX 5080 for the max GPU, you're welcome to, or a 5090, be my guest. If you can afford one, go for it. But that's to say this combo can handle any GPU you throw at it. There will be no bottlenecking. This is based off my $2,000 PC build on pcbuilds.gg. If you wanted to build a PC based off this combo, and it can do everything. It should be able to do everything. I don't want to see any questions about it. But here is the special combo that I alluded to at the very beginning in this section, the 1080p++ esports gaming PC. This is pretty nice. This is for people who want to only play non-graphically demanding esports games like Valorant, Counter-Strike 2, Overwatch 2, League of Legends, Marvel Rivals, Deadlock, Marathon, I guess. Those games that were designed to run on any computer because they're mostly free-to-play games, and their revenue model is based off of not selling the game, but getting people to buy skins and such, hence why it needs to run on anything, so they don't use any VRAM at all. And you can get away with a graphics card that has only 8 gigabytes of VRAM running those games at 1080p. If anything, the CPU is a bit more of an important issue in this sort of combo than any other in this video, because you really want a CPU that can spool up that FPS since you aren't necessarily going to be GPU bound because those free-to-play esports games are so easy to run in the first place, but you gotta reach at least 360 FPS at 1080p. So for your CPU options, you aren't going to exclusively only want to consider Ryzen X3D CPUs. Those with lots of L3 cache are really awesome when you are not GPU bound and you're CPU bound. You look at benchmarks, they are basically creaming over Intel. Like, I'm sorry, there's no arguments against it. Ryzen X3D is the way to go for an esports build where you're going to be CPU bound, because these just have a lot of L3 cache, which are going to be great for 1% lows and high FPS gaming at a lower resolution. Then for your CPU cooler options, because it's going to be a little bit more CPU reliant, we could go with slightly beefier cooling solutions, like a beefier aftermarket aluminum heatsink or an AIO, whatever fits your fancy and your budget. And then for motherboard options, B850 is fine, but if you wanted to go with the 9800X3D or the 9850X3D or any CPU that is Ryzen 9000 that ends in X3D, I would actually go with a X870 motherboard, because those Ryzen CPUs can be overclocked and you can actually get a little more FPS out of them. Unlike Ryzen 7000, which are locked in terms of clock speed. Then for RAM, you know, it's whatever you can afford. Just make sure it's at least 16 gigabytes of RAM. Then for the power supply options, let's start off with 750 watts, but at most 1050 watts for eventually an RTX 5090 if you, for whatever reason, end around to getting to own one. So for the minimum GPU option, the RTX 5060 Ti 8GB is the best. For a 1080p esports gaming PC, it is the fastest graphics card on the market with 8GB of VRAM, and it actually is kind of nice because with how much VRAM is costing nowadays with increasing memory prices, that's not really affected the 5060 Ti 8GB, unlike the 16GB model, which has undergone some pretty hefty price increases because it has 16 gigabytes. But if you aren't running into any VRAM limited scenarios, you are going to get the exact same performance out of a 5060 Ti 8GB as you would out of a 5060 Ti 16GB. That's pretty neat. It's a really great GPU just for 1080p gaming. Don't consider 1440p on it. Well, actually, you could do 1440p esports games. You still wouldn't tax that 8GB VRAM buffer. But again, it is a special graphics card for a special purpose. If you wanted to run Elder Scrolls 6, Grand Theft Auto 6, or Half-Life 3 on it at 1440p, good luck. That is going to completely just obliterate the 8GB VRAM buffer on that GPU. But if you just wanted to do League of Legends, World of Warcraft, Valorant, those sorts of games, you are pretty much good to go. Then for the max GPU options, you can go with whatever you want because you have the fastest CPUs on the market. You're not going to bottleneck any GPU you pair with them. So yeah, if you wanted to throw in a 5090 or a 9070 XT, feel free to. Just entirely depends on your budget. And I do actually have a dedicated 1080p esports PC builds on pcbuilds.gg if you wanted to build a PC around this combo for all of you sweaty esports gamers that like to play on your high refresh rate 1080p monitors to feel like you're in the zone and have that super duper fluid motion. And this can do everything but not sim racing if you go with the RTX 5060 Ti 8GB. For sim racing, you want a GPU with ideally at least 12 to 16 gigabytes of VRAM, and that 5060 Ti 8GB just doesn't have enough unless you go with a max GPU option. Otherwise, this is fine for 1080p esports, but let's move on to the final category of this video. Now let's go ahead and finish out with the best high-end CPU and GPU combos, which is to say there's only one because it is the absolute fastest. You can't build anything faster than this. Even if you wanted to spend an egregious amount of money on top of this, you aren't going to get anything meaningful. Regardless, let's talk about it because it's fun to talk about ridiculously expensive computers. So for the CPU options, again, you're only going to want to consider AMD Ryzen. Even Intel's fastest CPU, like the 285K or the 270K Plus, doesn't even come close to a Ryzen 7 9800X3D or even the absolute fastest Ryzen 9 9950X3D2. So we're only going with AMD because this is the absolute fastest. For the cooler options, again, feel free to get something beefier as far as an air or water cooler, up to you. For the motherboard options, you could go with B850 or X870. If you wanted to overclock those 9000 series X3D CPUs, I do so on the X870 motherboard because those have more power phases and can support completely insane CPUs like the 9950 X3D2, a 16-core 32-thread CPU with lots of 3D V-cache at a higher clock speed. So you probably want an X870 motherboard for that. 32 to 64 gigabytes of RAM. So whatever, if you got this much money, you might as well go 64 or 96. Like, come on, you might as well. Then for the power supply options, because I think you'll be drawing a bit more wattage out of these, why not a 1050 watt 80 plus gold to start things off, or even a 1200 watt. Both will support an RTX 5090 and an overclocked 9950X3D2, which, speaking of, for our GPU options, all of our max GPU options from the last category are now our minimum GPU options. Anything works. You can go with a 9070 XT from AMD if you wanted to be a little bit money conscious. If you weren't money conscious and you wanted to throw money away into a furnace, you could go with a 5080, or you could go with a 5090. The world is your oyster if you can afford a PC like this. And you know what? When I publish this video, I promise you the 5090 will keep going up in price, maybe even the 5080. So buying one now might actually be your cheapest for the rest of the time, because I don't know if NVIDIA are going to come out with an RTX 6090 at all, actually. They may just entirely go into AI. Anyways, this is my $2,500 PC build on PCBuilds.gg if you wanted to build a PC somewhat similar to this. And this is the best PC possible in this combo, so it should do everything: ray tracing, streaming, editing, VR, sim racing, everything. So once again, all of these combos and individual parts can be found in the description down below, but if you really wanted to avoid all of those various links, I really just go to PCBuilds.gg, play with the different filters, and find out your right PC build list for your needs. And again, those are all utilizing the best CPU and GPU combos found from this video. So with all of that said, thank you so much for watching, and this is the Skydival channel, signing out.